how do you decide on an idea to write? This is very inspirational.
Sunflowers burst out through the ground and
Two vultures collide.
that was
Who is
his-
that?
Yeah,
Who is
yeah,
that? Who
yeah,
wrote that? When Djinns of Eidgah and Pala were both stopped, there was a joke amongst my friends that I had managed to unite the Indian government and the Chinese government on one thing, that both would stop my place.
Don't be afraid to write shit. I mean, that's the number one rule of writing. I mean, it's the first draft a lot of times needs to be rubbish.
I think one learns to trust one's audience and say they are intelligent, they will join the dots, they will understand. I don't need to spell it out.
Hello and welcome back to season 2 of Unscripted with Akarsh Khurana, an Aadyam podcast produced by M&M Talkies. Today we're going to be talking to the unsung heroes behind every powerful play, moving monologue or memorable line on stage. Yes, we're talking about playwrights, the wordsmiths who spin magic on paper and make us laugh, cry and often question our very existence. From crafting dialogues that echo through auditoriums to exploring societal issues with a razor-sharp pen, writing for theatre is an art that requires not just creativity but also a deep understanding of humanity. And we will get into the nuts and bolts, the challenges, inspirations, and the quirks that go into this fascinating craft. Our first guest is someone who has taken Indian theatre to the global stage. From writing plays that are set in conflict zones to teaching future generations of storytellers, his words are as impactful as they are thought-provoking. We're talking about Abhishek Majumdar. Secondly, we have someone who wears many hats besides being a playwright. She is an actress, a teacher, and currently runs Drama School Mumbai. This is, of course, Irawati Karnik. And lastly, we have a gentleman whose first play ran for 10 long years and still resonates with audiences long after it's shut down. He's a master of capturing urban chaos and charm. We're talking about Sidharth Kumar, a man who knows how to keep it real on stage and in life. Welcome to this episode of Unscripted with Akarsh Khurana, and thank you so much for being here. We have lots of playwriting oriented questions to ask, but I want to start a little easy. We'll get into controversial bits later. But I just wanted to know from each of you all, what is your first memory of what drew you to actually becoming playwrights? What is that core memory that you will now unlock for us?
I mean, for me, the thing was, I was always afraid to write something. I had acted on stage for a few years, directed a few plays, one of which you produced, and a couple of which you produced. But I was a little apprehensive about putting my own stuff on paper because, if you're a bad actor, everything else in the play is fine. If you're a bad director, maybe the text is fine, and then the actors enjoy seeing those lines. But if you write a bad play and then you're making everyone come to rehearsal to read that bad play, it's terrifying, it's daunting. But at the time, there was this thing called writer's block that was happening every few years, which is how I met Irawati and Abhishek. And the way that worked was you had to submit a play of your own and then you might get selected.
As an application.
Yeah. So I wrote a play just for the submission because I hadn't written anything. And it was only after I got accepted into writer's block, I thought, okay, maybe I can be brave enough to show this to someone. And I showed it to you. And it was a weekend. And I overslept the next day. And when I woke up, I had SMSs on my old Nokia phone saying that I'm doing the play, I'm directing it, this is the dates, this is the cast. And I'm like, wait, what happened? Right? So this play that was supposed to be just as a submission to learn how to write a play suddenly got produced by you. And yeah.
But the almost the urge to kind of, considering you were an actor primarily, and you had directed, the urge to actually do a writer's block was to see how much you could push yourself? Or?
Yes, it was just this seems like an exciting process.
Right.
It seemed like it was an exciting sort of structure put in place where people went, had a good time, met other people, and just as a theatre exercise, it seemed
the
like
writer's block itself.
Yeah. And I think in the process of writing that first piece to submit it, it was also a little bit feeding that actor part of me, which was like, ooh, when you write, you get to mess around with characters like you do as an actor. You get to, write scenes that you think would be a cool scene to participate. You're playing the lines in your head as an actor would to see if it sounds
Oh,
right.
were you writing it for yourself? Because I didn't cast you in it.
No, I wasn't right. I would have been terrified right for myself. But it just sort of, when you're not maybe getting work as an actor, it kind of fills in a void a little bit in a way.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was it.
What about you, Ida?
I don't know if there's a single core memory like that. I remember I went to boarding school very young, and until then I was from a middle class Marathi family. We spoke Marathi at home. Even though my school was English medium, we still spoke Marathi in school. The only time we used English was while writing exams. So when I went to this boarding school, I was required to speak in English 24/7, and I couldn't. And I had a lot to say, but I just couldn't form sentences quickly enough in English. And then the most common advice you get is read, read, read. But I struggled even to read. But the easiest thing I found to read at that time was plays. Somehow,
Okay, wow,
yeah,
okay.
somehow I could hear those people and I could easily access those texts.
But you were reading plays in English.
English,
Okay.
yeah, to learn English.
Okay.
So then I found myself, okay, like this seems like a form that agrees with me somehow. There's something that I understand. I can hear these people in my head. So there was a lot of that happening. And it was a school that encouraged a lot of theatre. And I was generally, because I was a vernacular kid, I was also very uncool. So because they encouraged theatre, we got to do some Hindi theatre as well. And that is where I suddenly felt myself kind of come alive somewhat. The kind of complex about language, complex about a lot of things, the wrong accent, the wrong clothes, the wrong everything. It just didn't matter.
This is as an actor.
Yeah.
Right.
So it just didn't matter anymore. And I just found a lot of freedom in that. So that had a kind of stayed with me a little bit. But the actual foray into theatre happened kind of accidentally. My father used to take me to Avishkar as a child as well,
Right.
and even as I was older, I used to go there quite often. And then I was in JJ School of Fine Art, and we randomly
JJ School of Art? What do you?
Applied
wow,
art,
okay,
no?
yeah.
I was applied art.
Okay.
The less school one.
No, the posher one.
Okay.
Wow.
We were considered the unbathed ones.
Nice.
So
Okay,
Wow,
that's
you-
the difference.
You clearly didn't
I was
see
wondering
me
what the
during
difference is. Now we
college.
get it, okay.
so yeah, so then
Also, there's like a history of being slotted into stuff, huh, for you. So yeah, like
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I think
Yeah.
we have to spend some time after this.
After this, yeah.
Yeah, so then through that we participated in some intercollegiate competition. I happened to meet Chetan. He was one of Chetan Dada. He
Chetan
was one
Datar,
of
yes,
the
yes.
judges, and then somehow I just got pulled into the theater, and I kind of never
But
stopped.
all this is as an actor, you're saying.
I first got pulled in as an actor,
Right.
but I was just a very jittery actor because I would keep exiting the stage and then coming and sitting with Chetan and saying it should be this and they should say that and they should go there. And he was like, "You're actually not interested in acting. Just
Nice. Okay.
do this."
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, so I kind of found these things quite accidentally afterwards.
And that's what led to perhaps
yeah,
attempting
just
your
staying
hand
on
at
and doing
writing.
more
Okay.
and yeah.
Okay. Nice. And you, Abhishek, did you also start as an actor?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Actually, I used to write short stories when I was in college, in university.
Okay.
I mean, just for myself, I had a good time writing those short stories. And later on, many years later, I was attending Mahesh Dattani's acting class in Bangalore.
Okay.
And he was running in parallel writing class.
Right.
I was in the acting class. And I had a short story called Palace of Potholes, which I had written when I was in university. And I was sitting with my girlfriend then somewhere, and I was telling, she said, why don't you write this as a play? And I said, but I don't know how to write a play. So she said, why don't you go and ask Mahesh if he will take you in his
Writing
next class?
workshop. Yeah, right.
But it was a basic and an advanced. So I said, he's not going to take me in the advanced class. So she said, maybe you should go and talk to him. So I met him and I spoke to him, and he was very kind. He said, I'll take you if you already write a draft and bring. If you do that, then I'll take you. The other thing was, I was already paying for the acting class in installments. So I said, can I pay for this one in installments. And he said, no, I have one scholarship. So if you write the draft, then I will give you the scholarship.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So that was also the first theatre scholarship I had, thanks to him and playwriting.
Wow.
So that's what got me started into writing a play. Otherwise, I don't know, I would have been very interested, but I don't know how I would have made a start as a playwright. But thanks to him
And your girlfriend.
and my girlfriend,
Yes.
it
Who-
did happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. And I was going to ask about it later, but since it did come up, just a little bit about Writer's Block. Writer's Block, actually, now all four of us have been a part of,
Yeah.
and it's actually quite a wonderful initiative.
Yeah.
Has it stopped?
It sounds like it.
It
Yeah,
has,
I
it has.
feel
Yes, it has.
It has stopped. This was in association with the Royal Court.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Yes.
So-
Rage did it. No?
Yeah. So
Rage
what
did it.
what happened?
Why did it
Yeah.
stop?
I mean, Royal Court's international department is shut down
Okay.
for the
Yeah.
last 2 years.
Okay.
I think that's one of the reasons
Okay,
why there's no
okay,
writer's
sure.
block.
I also think the sponsorship for the festival dried out.
But I
Okay.
think, yeah, on the Royal Court end of things, I think just worldwide, but also in the UK, the
Yeah.
slow draining of funding for the arts
Yeah.
over there
Yes.
just made it, I guess.
No, so I want to
difficult.
talk about your experience at Writer's Block, of course, but for people listening who might not be aware of it, so Writer's Block was basically like a writing workshop
Yeah.
where the Royal Court Theatre from the UK would commission a few plays on the basis of applications, and then you all would be mentored through it to write a draft. Like they would take you through. Is that correct, more or less? Is that
Yeah, we did multiple drafts.
Yeah, and we'd have to come back after like 6 months at the same space and then work on
and
that
you were
draft.
working with people from the UK who were theatre makers from there.
Yes. As
Uh,
well as theatre makers from
India.
obviously from Bombay.
Yeah, yeah.
So we would have in the second round we would have actors come and read our scripts, so we would hear what they sounded like, and you have directors
Come
give
in and do
inputs and
scene
stuff.
work. Yeah.
Yeah. So
sounds like an extremely necessary kind of exercise.
Yeah.
But what were your biggest take homes from Writer's Block? And I believe you all were in the same edition.
yes.
So
Yeah.
all three of you had plays in that same edition of
Yeah.
Writer's Block. So how was that process for you all? How did it, what was the biggest take home from something like that?
I mean, my biggest take home is I don't know if I would been a writer if it wasn't for that.
Right.
You know,
In
that-
terms of the encouragement and
in
the,
terms of the encouragement, it felt like a safe space that, you know,
Right.
A, to apply, but B, to sort of figure out. I mean, like, in addition, of course, to the instructors, you put in this residency for like a couple of weeks with, you know, like I got to meet Irawati, I got to meet Abhishek, who had been, you know, performed playwrights in the past. And so it wasn't just you were learning from the instructors, you were learning from these other playwrights who had experience and they were bringing their perspective to playwriting. So even if it was intended to be a very strict or royal court sort of instruction and approach to theatre, it was like after that class, then you meet the other writers and they'd be like, well, you know, they have their way of doing it, but, you know, it doesn't have to be that way as well.
right.
So it was a very, it was a big life-changing thing for me. for
and
sure.
you all were both performed playwrights by then.
Yeah.
So how was that for you? Like for him, I understand that it would be the initial encouragement, but how was that for you guys as a process?
You know, the thing is, you can be a performed playwright and still not feel like you're one.
Right.
Because with every play, I suppose, as a playwright, you recognize that until the play has been performed a few times, and its test is really the number of years that people want to do it.
Right.
It's not really in your hands.
Yes.
So I don't remember having any such conception of, you know, I'm
Of being a performed playwright when you went there.
That
Right.
was not.
Right.
In fact, I had been rejected in writer's block twice.
Oh wow.
So I
Okay.
got selected the third time. So I was
Okay.
just really very happy to
Be
make
there.
it
Yeah.
to Royal Court. It was life changing for me because I ended up working with Royal Court for almost 12 years. I had 2 plays put up there in Djinns,
Yes,
Eidgah and
yes.
Pala, and
Pala.
Elise Dodson, who was the head of the international department. Unfortunately, she passed away just before my second play there.
Okay.
But she was really like a theatre mother to me.
I see.
So even now in my books, I mention my mother's name and I mention her name because she took me to places and gave me a kind of exposure which I don't think I would have had the confidence also to, you know, enter.
Yeah. Wow. Lovely. And what about you, Ira?
It was an extremely eye-opening experience for me. I had access to very kind of standard English playwrights until then. Stuff that was easily available, stuff that was considered classics.
Yes.
But suddenly, through the Royal Court, we were exposed to a lot of contemporary English writing that just threw open a whole world of possibilities. That playwriting can be this way. That was the first thing that I was just reeling in the amount of exposure that came. Secondly, honestly, until that point, I didn't know that it was possible to approach craft like that,
Hmm.
playwriting craft.
Hmm.
I had been writing a lot of one act plays. A couple of my plays had been performed also. And then suddenly, here was this group of people
Hmm.
that were dissecting a play and approaching playwriting in this supremely almost scientific manner.
Yes.
There was something very exciting about the possibility of that kind of control. So I got very excited when the workshop was on. So yeah, but it opened up collaborators, it opened up just possibilities in terms of ideas, approach. Yeah, it was just like it was pre-writer's block and post-writer's block has just been a wholly
Whole
different
different.
kind of life.
How do you decide on an idea to write? This is very inspirational.
I mean, no,
For-
look,
for the youngsters
No, no,
watching
I
for
mean, like,
answers.
I think it would be true for the two of them. Is I don't think there's any one sort of starting point. Because,
Right.
like, for example, for my personal experience, the interview,
Yeah.
again, the inspiration for that.
Yeah.
Because we
corporate
both,
hell that you lived through.
yeah,
So,
we both worked on
Wow, okay,
some
huh.
corporate films, and we were working for a client that was particularly interesting, shall we say, for lack of a better term. And the idea for the play started with, I wonder what it would be like to have a job interview in a place like this. And the process there, because I had no formal training at the time and stuff like that, was I had that one line and I just kept writing. And I
Right.
kept writing and kept writing and kept writing, kept going forward. Then when something was taking shape, then you go to the top. And what was beneficial was the fact that I was just writing for a deadline.
Right.
I wasn't writing for, oh, will actors like to say these words? Will a director want this? Will a producer want this? I didn't have to worry about any of that. And I think the freedom that gives you, like, forms the number one rule for me, at least for writing, which is, don't be afraid to write shit. Like, know that draft one is supposed to be garbage,
Right.
but that's but then the second one with writer's block, it came from that process, that formal structural process. The Royal Court came to you. They were very keen for us to start with a theme, right? Because also the way the Court approach for international play was, they would prefer you to approach social subjects and things like that,
Sure,
just
right.
by the nature of it,
Right.
so that it, oh, if we had to take this back to the UK, okay, it's about this theme and this
Right.
social issue. So that's where they started from. So my play started from that sort of platform. But I mean, it can start from another approach that they had, was just write a scene, right? What is the first, any scene at any point of this play, and then is this compelling you enough to write a play around this, right? So it really can be, there can be a relationship between two very interesting characters, and then you find the play around that. It can be all kinds of things, really.
What about you two?
Again, different starting points. I remember there was one play I was reading, Durga Bhagavat's Rutu Chakra, and she's written in great detail about the change in seasons. And for the last few years of her life, she was bedridden, and all she could see was this window, and she could see the outside through that window. And the woman has managed to write a book about the world that she saw changing through that
the
window.
window,
It
yeah.
is incredible.
Right.
And so I was reading that, but it led to kind of me thinking about a play about a young girl getting her first period. And then I set it in Revdanda, which was a certain kind of cultural context. Didn't have a mother, was being brought up by her father, and then kind of, I think at some point the play kind of acquires its own life
Yes.
and then grows. But the starting point was that. So there isn't any direct relationship between the two, but that's how it began. There was another play where I actually got annoyed with my parents at home, they were talking about. So there's a lot of like anti-class, anti-caste
Hmm.
talk that happens at home. Our family is very. They were involved in the Jayaprakash Narayan movement and um, you know activists,
Correct.
journalists.
Yes.
But there's a lot of pride with our caste.
Our caste. Yes. Yes.
So there's a lot, and they keep saying, "Oh no, but it's about food. Oh, but it's about whatever." And I used to get very annoyed with this kind of beaming that happened with the referencing of but our caste. And so then I wanted to actually say, okay, what is the big deal with this caste?
Right.
Why? What is where? Is there actually? Is it actually rooted in any kind of real reason for pride?
Yeah.
So I wrote this play about a family belonging to that caste,
Okay.
and the play begins in 1947 and it ends in 2003. That's when I wrote the play. So it's this kind of study of all the social, political, relationships, class, like all the changes that this family kind of goes through across that time. So then, of course, it didn't remain my family anymore,
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
but the starting point was that. There was another play where, I mean, I've spoken about this actually. I have always, so a lot of my starting points tend to be very personal
Right.
and then it becomes something else.
Sure.
There was one, so for the first like 3 years of my life, I think 3 years or 2 years of my life, I was brought up by my grandmother. My parents weren't around.
Hmm.
And for the longest time, I remember being very confused as a child about whether she was a good human being or not. I remember having quite a tough time with her. And
Hmm.
sometimes she would shower me with love, but a lot of the times she was extremely nasty. There was
Hmm.
something very like vicious about her. But I never doubted that she loved me.
Correct.
But it was very confusing as a child.
Yes. Yes. Of course. Yeah.
And I thought as a grown up, I wanted to reconcile with this animal. What is this woman? Um, so I kind of started looking into that and what could, and then again, my grandmother kind of got left behind at some point.
Right.
And then I built a whole world around this woman, and that turned into this play called Chappa Katta, which was a
Yes.
mother and a daughter
Yes.
story about this kind of
That
slightly
relationship.
toxic relationship.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Abhishek, with you, I mean, I'm sure in your body of work there is also a lot of personal stuff. But like like if we are talking about the writer's block that we were talking
Mm.
about, and you did Djinns of Eidgah,
Yeah.
which is a play set in Kashmir, and
Yeah.
it's about something that perhaps you're not directly
Mm.
in touch with.
Yeah.
So in terms of that, or like Gasha, which you had directed, or some of the other stuff that you've written is also worlds that are a little removed from
Mm.
you, as far as I'm aware.
Mm.
So what draws you to that? What is your
Mm.
starting point?
Yeah. I think there are, as you rightly said, there are both kinds of plays.
Gasha, sorry, is written by you though.
Is
Yes,
by,
yes, yes.
I'm interested in theater as a form of study or as
Yes.
a form of research. So I really like making plays which have long research phases
Yes.
about things that I'm interested in, but I don't know enough about. So I would have read a
Right.
lot about it, and then I would have got interest. I'm the kind of person who goes to a barber shop and finishes reading whatever is there while I'm waiting. So there is no dearth of things that I would be interested in,
Sure.
but obviously not all of it becomes theater.
Correct.
Sometimes it is about, like when I came back from drama school in England, I was very sure that I wanted to go to Kashmir and write about Kashmir. And eventually it became 3 plays. One I wrote and directed, the other I directed but did not write, which is Gasha. And the third I wrote but I did not direct, which is Djinns of Eidgah.
So which is the first?
First is Rizwan.
Okay, yes, yes, of course.
The second is Djinns of Eidgah. The third is Gasha.
Right.
So there is this kind of, I'm like, now we are working together on this Ambedkarite opera,
Yes.
which is in collaboration with Yalgar, which is an Ambedkarite Shahiri Jalsa group.
Right.
But I'm really interested in Ambedkarite work, and Ira and I have been talking about it for a while, and and then somehow this has also been 2 years since we have been working on this, and now it's opening. So this is just very simply, I'm interested in things and they become theater. I think that's, instead of writing a MPhil thesis, the theater is my way of working on it. And of course, people I work with, like Ira and I have worked a lot together. A lot of the projects become projects when I know that, okay, Ira is on board. Sandeep is on board, somebody else is on board, somebody I want to work with. But for me, a lot of times nowadays, I think in the last 4 or 5 years, the starting point is something I want to do in the theater, like technically or formally. Like for Djinns of Eidgah, I definitely wanted to do something with Dastan Goi.
Okay.
So it's written in the structure of Dastan.
Okay.
And it turned out while researching the play that in 1980s, Dastan Goi used to play on Radio Kashmir. And then that was banned by the government because if you listen to Dastan, there are stories about war. And the government thought that maybe there are people passing each other messages about war.
Wow. Okay.
So somehow that concept made its way very easily into the play itself. So it
Right.
has a structure of a Dastan Goi.
So again, a question which is, I mean, I'll come to independent work questions in a bit, but now actually all three of you have also directed, right? So when you're writing, do you feel at all ever influenced or constrained by the practicality of putting up a play?
15 years ago when I was writing for Avishkar.
Yes,
So even when I would be imagining the play unfolding,
you were seeing it
I
happen.
would see it in the Avishkar space.
Entries, exits, and set kitna and kharcha.
हाँ,
So
कि
yes,
इतनी सी स्पेस में उसको फिट करना है,
correct, correct.
ये कहाँ से आएगा,
हाँ,
ये नहीं आएगा.
correct.
You know, it was a very
Yeah.
very clearly I was trying to fit it into Avishkar. And then I had to very consciously remind myself that I'm not only going to be making plays for Avishkar.
Right.
So don't worry about the space, open it up. In fact, it was Royal Court, the writer's block workshop, where I realized that it was okay to write impractical stage directions. Because Marathi theatre also has a history of overwritten stage directions.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, if you notice all the classics, if you look at all the Marathi plays, there's a lot of, there is a door on the left, next to it there is a staircase.
Old English
There is-
plays
yeah,
are
yeah,
they
so
are
it's
very
similar, yeah,
restricting.
yeah.
I mean, after a point, you don't read those.
So
but
you kind
yeah.
of you kind of think that you need to
be that
all of it
specific.
in,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
And then I was reading plays in writer's block where sunflowers burst out through the ground and
Two
or-
vultures collide.
that was
Who
his.
is that?
Yeah,
Who
yeah,
wrote that?
Then two rats run across the stage and
That's also him.
no,
Okay.
and carry
So-
a hand away. Two rats carry an arm away, and I was like, what is going on? So then I thought, okay, I mean, I don't want to write two rats carry a hand away, but sure, okay, then let's kind of push this, open it up. So
Right.
that was the other thing. Having said that, when I write for the commercial Marathi stage, which is a very, very specifically
Specific, yeah.
different from experimental
Yes.
animal,
Yes.
I do have to think in terms of how will this get executed? Will it fit in Shivaji Mandir? Will it fit in
the
Ghanekar?
logistics.
Will
Yeah.
it has to. And
Yeah.
if it doesn't, then it won't get made. And I think the kind of need for reaching the kind of numbers that theatre reaches, that impact is just too important to let go of for the sake of artistic freedom. Or I mean, I wouldn't say artistic freedom.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? This kind
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
imaginative
No, you are
leaps
bound a
in-
little bit by the logistics of it
yeah,
because
but
it has
I'm
to.
okay with that
yeah.
because I feel like the payoff is the numbers that the play reaches, and I think that's more important. So sometimes over there I do let the constraints dictate certain terms.
Fair. What about you?
I grew up on watching Habib Tanvir's rehearsals,
Right.
which used to happen where I used to live. And I saw a lot of Gadwali Ramlila.
Okay.
Now the thing advantage with watching Ramlila is that you actually have no concept of realism, right? So I have never actually felt that there's something that you cannot stage.
Or pull off. Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't have this problem. So when I'm writing, I'm only interested in reading scripts or writing plays which seem impossible because I'm not sure what is it
Nice.
that is not possible to stage. I think what is expensive is trying to create realism for every microsecond of stage.
Yeah.
Like if I have an aeroplane, then how do I?
How do I show an aeroplane?
But form is not expensive.
yeah.
Form is really about your training in the theater, the training of your mind. How do you, like cubism is not more expensive than expressionist painting or realist painting.
Yep.
It's really about imagination. And I think the theater is about what the audience imagines
Yes, absolutely.
and not about what it sees. So I've never seen anything more visual than Kudiyatam, for example. And it's just one actor with a lamp. So that's not to say at all that I would want to have minimalism throughout my life.
Sure,
I've
of
done
course.
plays which are very minimalistic, and sometimes I've been in theaters where there's been everything,
Yes.
somewhere in Europe, let's say. But I keep going back to that Ramlila in my head, and I think I don't think about staging while writing. And I like working with writers who, as a director, I'm saying, when I'm directing other people's or devising, I'm really interested in working with writers who don't worry about it as well, who write things like, I mean, Ira is talking about vultures, but Ira has written two boys take a boat, go into the middle of Dal Lake and have a picnic for Gasha.
Yes.
I can show multiple drafts which has like things like this.
Yeah.
So I really like that. I enjoy that about the theater.
About
what
how
it
to
can
kind of,
do.
yeah, no, absolutely. So, a couple of individual questions, and then we'll go into what is supposed to be a rapid fire. But like I keep saying, I'm not rapid, so we call it slow burn. So that's my favorite joke in my own podcast. But so a couple of one-on-one questions that are related, but so one that had to come. Abhishek, a lot of your work, because of its perhaps political nature, has been controversial, to say the least. There are stories of cast and crew being led away from venues in Jaipur because of protests and stuff, and things have got quite tricky in some places. When things like that happen, does that affect your next work?
It doesn't affect the next work, but there was one year when Djinns of Eidgah and Pala were both stopped. And there was a joke amongst my friends that I had managed to unite the Indian government and the Chinese government on one thing, that both would stop my plays.
Nice.
It felt very flattering, but at the same time, it was difficult because one works on these plays for really long.
Yes, of course.
And then if they don't see the light of day, worse, they see the light of day and then they are shut down. It's problematic, and there is a lot of censorship like that.
Yes.
There is a myth that if your work gets banned or blocked, it actually becomes more popular.
No, yeah.
Which is absolutely not so. What happens is that people stop producing your work. There have been festivals in India which have been told not to do my work. But having said all that, if I had more work, I wouldn't be able to do it because I mean, I can say it with some pride. I'm booked for a very long time. So and I'm very lucky that I have never had to compromise in the theater.
Right.
I've not written a single sentence or produced a single scene which would be a compromise for anything. I have had the good fortune of having great collaborators and friends like all of you who have supported me. I remember coming to Bombay with Eidgah ke Jinnat, and we had like 4 theater companies there to work backstage on the show. So yes, there is pushback sometimes from authorities. But as a writer, I think I have always looked up to writers who have faced that in their time. So I'm okay with it. I am happy to accept that.
But is it and I have been in a similar situation not so long ago, but as a creator, when you're creating something and there are so many more people involved, when it becomes a matter of being risky or dangerous, does that kind of frighten you, set you back, worry about all the other people that are involved? How do you come to terms with that?
I think over a period of time, I've learned that people who work with me, they have read the play, they know what they're signing up for when it is like that. And not all plays are obviously of the same nature.
Yes, of course,
because then it would be terribly boring to make that kind of theater. But I think most of my collaborators, in fact, I've realized, are more brave than I am, and sometimes much more enthusiastic about it than I am, which is great. It's very fulfilling when that happens. Uh, I remember one year I went back to where I teach in NYU, and I told my head of program that I don't know what I'm going to teach the students. I was teaching the playwriting class because everything I worked on in the last 5 years has essentially been shut down. And she said to me, "Well, that's exactly why we have you here." Yeah. And that felt really good. And many people like Ira and others have been in those situations with me, and they continue to pick up their phone when I call them,
That's
continue to come to rehearsal. So I think it's all right.
with the Djinns of Eidgah. Was it? Uh, did it get controversial only when you did it in Hindi?
Yes.
Because the English one performed and went
Yeah,
under the radar for
yes,
a
yes.
So
Yeah, it actually, that is true. Like if you do a play in Hindi or Bangla, or I think it gets more controversial
right,
because governments are scared of like
the
even
reach,
the language of the newspaper.
right,
They're infinitely more scared of Hindi newspaper than English newspaper.
right,
But also, what happened with Eidgah ke Jinnat is
Hmm.
that suddenly Pulwama happened, and this
right,
is after
Right.
we had started rehearsing.
right,
So what happened was there were people going into houses and pulling out Kashmiri students and beating them up at that time, if you remember.
Hmm.
This whole thing, people turned against Kashmiris, and here was a play about Kashmir, which obviously questioned both the Indian government and the CRPF and all the human cost of a conflict. And so we were like sitting ducks.
Yeah.
We were presenting the problem at a time when people took great pride in being offended.
So you help them channel their outrage. So-
Unwittingly,
yeah.
as long I'm happy to be of help
Yeah.
in any way.
They needed to vent.
Yes.
You helped.
Maybe that's the
You-
role of a playwright.
Yeah, therapy.
Yeah.
So-
Just went, yeah.
yeah. Ira, you mentioned you also wear many hats, even in terms of your writing. There is the commercial theater that you do, which is for the numbers, and there is other work that you do, and a lot of the work that you have even collaborated with him on, or your independent work, tends to be quite a deep dive and quite dense into, in the best way possible, but dense about a topic, and quite heavy in terms of the subject matter, perhaps. Do you feel some sort of a compulsion to find a balance where you need to make it entertaining as well?
Um, I don't think the dense work is not entertaining.
Okay.
Um, also, I feel like, I mean, if we are talking about the work that I've done with Abhishek, whether it is Gasha, whether it is Thuk, whether it is Muktidham, whether it is the one that we're doing right now, or this, there's a lot of humor. There's a lot of, in
Which is a
that
conscious
sense,
choice. You want to kind of present it in that manner.
yes. So there is a, I mean, I don't think it's a conscious choice. I think it's a part of, I mean, that's the kind of storytelling that I enjoy. And I also feel like if one wants to make someone think about something serious, uh, it helps to not kind of hold their head and shove it into the whatever, like the sugar coating of the pill a little bit. But it's not really a tactic.
Right.
It's a chosen form of storytelling, and I think that most of these subjects we've actually told them in really entertaining ways. So I
Yes.
have managed to find, um also because, so partly it is the subject, partly it is studying something, meeting people that one wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to meet, interacting with professionals that one wouldn't otherwise come across. Like we've interviewed sociologists, we've interviewed commodity traders, we've interviewed all kinds of people for various projects, and otherwise I would never have the chance to interact with these people. So it's also that opportunity to meet all these very different colorful people from very different walks of life. So there's something really interesting in that. And when you meet people, they are never one thing.
Hmm.
They are never their subject,
Yes.
or they are never their work. They come with their quirks, they come with their prejudices, they come with their humor. And I kind of enjoy drawing on that. So I do think that the humor or the entertaining quality of it also comes from from the people that we
Interact with.
that I interact with while making that work.
Sid, I have a question for you, which is actually to do with the relevance of work, and of course we've spoken about the interview which you wrote and which you won awards for and traveled with, and is also so far our longest running production,
Right.
and had a wonderful run for 10 years. But something happened where we felt the need to not do it anymore.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that. How does a play lose relevance?
I don't think it lost its relevance because I think the play was about a subject that, if anything, gets more relevant, with time. It's just, I think, the approach to certain aspects, maybe being younger, my first play, I was maybe a little bit more naive about, or a little more free with something that maybe should have been handled a little bit more delicately. And it was a very interesting sort of process because, I mean, it dealt with themes of, workplace misconduct
Right,
with a female colleague, right?
right.
And the point of dealing with that subject was to highlight that these things happen and these things are not like a part of the rot, sort of corporate sort of setup that can happen. But I think the approach to using it for humor, when and where we used it and how we used it, uh, at the time when we opened it, it seemed like a great idea because uh, every gag landed, right?
Yes, yes,
And then the Me Too movement happens,
right.
and I guess it was a great karmic sort of situation because I had to step in for the lead actor in those shows, and I firsthand, while I am saying those lines, can sense I'm getting silence,
Yeah,
and I'm getting this uncomfortable shifting in the seats.
right.
And then after show, people who've seen it before are coming to me like, did you add that? I'm like, no, this is the exact same play, but it
Yeah,
just leapt off the page and it's struck you so much more in a very different context now. So, like, if you ask me now if I'd written the play today, I probably wouldn't have avoided the subject altogether, but I would have maybe handled it maybe a little differently. So, yeah. So, I mean, I think the play is very relevant. It's just I think, and I think the subjects themes are very relevant. But I think me as a writer now, having that I wrote that what like 12, 13 years ago, I would have handled it very differently. Is all.
yeah. I think for me, I used to be in the tech booth of that because I was lighting that show, and I have actually watched over the 10 years towards the latter half of it. I saw the audience change, like the entire play, like, and suddenly you kind of realize that okay, something has shifted, and it's almost like what they were taking joy at suddenly became a very uncomfortable thing. So that's actually been our only experience of watching the world change,
Right.
and make a play almost less doable.
Right.
Do you guys ever look back at past work and think that there were choices you should have made differently?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm going first this time. They played Rizwan,
Yes.
it ends with, it is based on actually a book of poems by Agha Shahid Ali, the Kashmiri poet. It's a collection called The Country Without a Post Office, in which there is a boy called Rizwan.
Right.
And in the end, the last lines of that play are और भी जन्नत है रिजवान और भी चीजें हैं uh, पकड़ने के लिए या छोड़ने के लिए, something about not wanting to hold on to what you are losing,
Right.
and later on when I went to Kashmir and I was working on all these other plays, I realized the absolute discontentment with that ending. Because why would I be born, if I was born in Kashmir and I grew up within the conflict for 20 years? I mean, who is Abhishek, an Indian, to come and say, this is worth leaving and go?
Right.
That would make no sense, because so I changed that.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't change it in Rizwan, but that was absolutely not the ending of Djinns of Eidgah. And Gasha, of course, is a very different play and on a different note. So the politics, I think that's why it's also so interesting, like personal life. where it changes with time. You grow up and you realize that, oh, actually, you know, I thought that was something that should have that one should have made those kind of choices, but now you dive deeper and you realize, no, maybe that's not the choice that character should have made. So that happens.
Yeah. Um, a lot of the older work, I mean, not a lot, some of the older work, it feels like there is some kind of an insecurity about being able to convey as much as possible and worrying about,
Earlier, yeah,
yeah, it's some things tend to be slightly overwritten. You can tell that I'm trusting the audience a little less.
right,
And then
Hmm.
over time, I think one learns to trust one's audience and say they are intelligent.
enough, yeah.
They will join the dots, they will understand. I don't need to,
Spell it out.
spell it out. So there's that. There's also, uh, I mean, I knew it at the time, but now it feels much more problematic to me. For example, the ending of Chappa Katta.
Right.
There is a fundamental gap between these two women, and apart from being a mother and daughter, they're also women independently.
Sure.
And there are some things in them, in the way they have, where they've been born, the kind of education they have had, the way they've grown up, where that gap cannot be bridged. It's not motherly love or daughterly love or any kind of dialogue facilitated by anyone or any one emotionally heightened experience. Nothing can possibly bridge that gap. That's the tragedy of the relationship. And I feel like I didn't do justice to the tragedy of the relationship. It needs to end badly. Right now, it ends sort of badly. I've done a bit of a cop out. Uh, so, because I think I got a bit too attached to the characters
Right.
and I didn't want to do it to them, which is stupid. But at the time, I thought it was what the play needed, and. But now I feel like I do want to rewrite the end a little bit because I think it needs to end badly for them. So things like that.
One question I wanted to ask was when you, because you're consuming theater as well around you and you're watching a lot of theater happen around, uh, it's two pronged the question. One is, of course, what is the quality of Indian writing right now? How do you feel about Indian writing around you, barring your own writing, of course? Uh, and 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 what's happening out there to kind of help it if it needs help? I mean, like, say something like a writer's block doesn't happen anymore, but are there more initiatives that are, doing something to help perhaps budding playwrights? And if you know of any that are good, if you mention them, then people listening in can maybe look at that. But what do you feel is the quality of Indian writing around you right now to begin with? I love the pauses because that says so. I will keep the pauses
No,
in the edit.
the danger with this question is that it betrays how many plays I have watched or have not watched of late. I think one thing that, as I mentioned earlier, that has been kind of heartening with a lot of original work is, I think there has been a break away from doing a lot more traditional forms of theater. There has been a lot more, devised work and, physical work, and, the focus on the form on why are we doing this on stage. I think that does show in a lot of work. That doesn't necessarily speak to the quality of the writing.
Right.
I mean, there's definitely excellent work out there. But to give a cross section of generally how work is out there now, because there's a lot of smaller spaces and a lot of younger people that maybe didn't have access to a Prithvi or the NCPA putting up work there,
Yes.
and a lot of experimental work. So I'm not entirely sure about
The quality of that. Yeah.
that work, but
Yeah.
yeah, there is good stuff out there. I just don't know how it speaks to.
I mean, to answer that question, because I kind of engage quite a bit with a lot of the smaller spaces which are doing a lot of work, there's not so much original writing happening.
Right,
A lot of it is very inspired or borrowed or classics.
right.
There's not so much
Yeah,
original writing that I've come across because I'm always on the lookout.
right.
And there hasn't been so much in the smaller sections. There is,
Right.
of course, what we are talking about, what we
Yeah.
are exposed to, and the writers that do write
Yeah.
that we know, whether it's who are also prolific besides them, whether it's someone like Manav or it's Makarand or whoever's kind of quality notwithstanding, but they're
Yeah.
going on about it. But yeah, I feel there's a bit of a dearth of original stories out there personally, at least at the grassroots.
Yeah.
Even something like Thespo, for example.
Yeah.
A couple of the plays this time were heavily borrowed, even though they masqueraded as original.
Hmm.
So I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
there's that which is concerning to me, but
Right.
the two of you,
There isn't a lot of original Marathi writing going on.
right?
A lot of Marathi theatre makers have actually turned to other languages
Okay,
because there isn't a lot of Marathi audience. It's steadily changing,
oh, okay.
especially with new spaces in Pune right now. They've contributed a lot to building an audience for the Marathi stage again.
I always thought Marathi and Gujarati had very loyal
In the
audiences. That
commercial theatre space,
okay,
yes, but
okay.
again, you can't really count on quality over there.
Right,
It's
right.
very prolific. There's a lot of work happening, and then something in there happens to be decent, but it's rare. It's not a common thing. Experimental, hardly any. A lot of theatre people have also become absorbed into OTT films,
Yeah, yes,
things like that. And we're a relatively small fraternity,
that is
so
true.
that's also happened. But because of Drama School Mumbai, I also know that there is a whole bunch of young people right now trying to write. What I notice is there's very limited exposure, at least the kind of students that I come across. So there's kind of rediscovering the wheel a little bit, but there is curiosity. There is curiosity. A lot of them have things to say, which means they'll get there. So recently, I have seen a couple like "I Killed My Mother, It's Not My Fault"
Yes, I've heard about
Yes,
that.
was
Yes,
an
I've
yes.
heard about
example
that.
of a very well written play. Um, yeah, so I've seen a couple of. There was one play, Janpat Bijnor,
Yes, I'm
very
aware of
well
that. I'm aware
written
of that. Yeah.
play. That was good. So yeah, I've been coming across some one here, one there that is inspiring writing. That's promising.
And is there initiatives out there for playwrights?
Initiatives. I recently a series of master classes for something that Bhasha Center did,
Okay.
which is a program for Bengali playwrights.
Yes, yes. I heard about that.
So they worked with about five or six. We worked with about 5 or 6 Bengali playwrights, two of which have been commissioned
Oh, how nice.
to write a new play.
Okay.
They're also working on starting similar initiative for Kannada playwrights. So a lot of attention is being paid to regional writing, regional language writing.
Nice.
So I'm hoping, if other people also kind of get inspired by ideas like this. It doesn't have to be the same company that does it across the country. If people think it's an important enough idea, then it needs to get picked up because every time we kind of get around to talking about issues in the theater, the conversation invariably goes to funding. And I feel like that's a little like that's 3 steps away. Before
Right.
that, we should
We should
also talk
also have-
about, what are the ideas? What are the questions being asked?
And the
What is
content
the
we're developing. Yeah, yeah.
yeah?
So,
What are we really making?
yeah. What do you feel, Abhishek?
I think there's a lot of exciting, interesting theatre making going on.
Okay.
At least in the last 2-3 years, I've come across work from Jaipur, from Calcutta, from Bombay, Delhi. A lot of stuff in Kannada, which is new and exciting. So, I mean, I don't feel that there is a. I mean, I don't even know how to quantitatively say less or more, but I think there is good work out there. Processes keep changing. I think even in the West there was a notion that there's a writer, then there was a notion that there is device theater. Now there is a notion for several years that the device theater should have a writer inside it. So these processes
Keep changing.
keep changing, and whatever works. And I think wherever there are groups, like in whichever place there are theater groups, playwriting thrives. Because ultimately, if you're a playwright, you need to have a tribe of actors and directors, whether it's you or others, a stage, a room where people can come, which is essentially the difference between writing a play and writing a novel, for instance. So playwrights have always emerged out of the culture of groups. And to have a great theater scene, it's extremely vital to have a bad theater scene. Right? I mean, unless
That's
you
a
have
very
a
good
bad
point,
theater
yeah.
scene, you can't have a good theater scene.
That's a very good
It's
point,
like it's like biology. You have to do 1,000 failed experiments to
To
have
get
one
the-
right.
Yeah.
So it's I take like it's amazing to see walls in Aramnagar, for example, which are filled with posters. And the place can be good, bad, moderate, average,
they're
but it's
happening.
all going to feed into some great theater making that's going to emerge from this little
Yeah.
atmosphere,
That's a very good point. Yeah.
And I think that's what is going on, and it's great as long as the groups keep driving it.
So thank you. We'll move into the so-called rapid fire section of this. It's a shorter answers technically, hopefully, shorter questions also. Leading from this question, and you may have already answered it, but if you can add to it, of course. The recently Indian writing that you have seen that has really impressed you. You, of course, said Janpat Bijnor, and you
Yeah.
spoke of another
I
one.
killed my mother.
I Killed My Mother. But all three of you, anything recently that you've seen which is like Indian writing that you all were impressed with?
I liked this recent thespian production called Glitch in the Myth.
Yes.
Uh, that is by
Anushka Zaveri.
Zaveri.
yes, I really enjoyed that place, and it was also a beautiful production as well. It's well directed, well performed. Highly recommend that. Of course, I'd mentioned Mohit Akalkar is also a production.
Honkaro, yes.
Honkaro. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I've been familiar very recently with Mumal Tanwar's work in Rajasthan. She's been working a lot of with women,
Okay.
mainly women who were not even allowed to go out of their homes, and doing theater on the terraces.
Okay.
And there have been extraordinary narratives, coming out of that. Women
Wow.
who have not stepped out and are telling stories which are performed on terraces. I think that's been extraordinary work that has happened. There are a bunch of, Jyoti Dogra's work is extraordinary. I think she's an extraordinary writer.
Mizok.
I
Beautiful
think,
writing.
yeah,
Someone else also recommended Mizok on our show.
she's
Yeah.
Oh, I have not seen
amazing.
that.
I think in Kerala, Shankar has been creating great work. He's also writing his work. He's now opened new space. It's been a while, couple of years. So he's creating work that is written for that space, which is in Attapadi, in a almost in a forest. So they're all like three completely different formats, but they are not in traditional sort of theater cities. These are also other than Jyoti, of course, who is in a. I don't even know if Jyoti is really technically in a city. Like she's in her own
Yeah.
universe, which is
Right,
Yeah.
beautiful,
right.
to see. But yeah, I think all these examples of new writing are in different forms, which is exciting.
Lovely. You mentioned that you were a fan of Mohan Rakesh.
Yes.
So, question for all of you is inspirations and favorite playwrights. So, anyone you want to add to that, or is
Tony Kushner.
right? And Mohan Rakesh. What about you?
Lucy Kirkwood. Elkunchwar.
Nice.
Tendulkar.
How about you, Sid?
I mean, of course, very early on, like Neela Bute's work was very exciting. Of course, Pinto is very fascinating for me. Yeah.
Karnad. I want to add Karnad.
Karnad, yes,
Yes, Karnad for sure.
of course. And for a little bit for people who kind of want to start off in playwriting, it's always something that people seem to struggle with that first step in terms of that. So I'll keep it easy in the sense that either a piece of advice that you would give to someone who's starting off, if that's easier, or necessary reading that you think would be that. I mean, of course, reading plays would be important because a lot of people come to me and say we want to join the theater, but they don't watch anything. So it's
Yeah.
like you need to watch it. You need to understand what you don't want to do first, if at all. But so either a piece of advice for someone who wants to get into playwriting, or perhaps necessary reading. It could be either or both from each one of you, please.
I think the thing to do is to watch live performance of whatever kind, anything, dance, theater, music, watch a sport, watch a game live. I think that's one thing about playwriting which is vital to understand how an event unfolds live. And to read, I mean, if one is starting out, I would say take a playwright whose work you like, take one of their plays and read it thrice.
Nice.
The first time, read it non-stop. The second time, take a break after every whatever 1/3 and think about it and come back. And the third time, again read it non-stop. I think you'll completely read a different play
Different
by
play.
the third time. And if you do that for 10 plays, you're started. You've already started.
That's great advice.
Um, I think just, I mean, in terms of reading, I feel like find plays wherever you can and just read. Read indiscriminately and discover what appeals to you. Many a times, recommendations, people kind of feel the pressure to like it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then if they don't, they feel like, oh,
Oh, maybe
okay,
there's
there's a
something
disconnect.
wrong with us because we can
Find what
understand.
is
Yeah.
drawing you. So
Yeah.
read indiscriminately. In terms of writing, two things. I get approached by a lot of young people who say, I have a concept. Will you help me turn it into a play? And I keep telling them, I know you think you don't know how to write a play, and you think that I'm going to give you some mantra, some,
Yeah.
and then you're going to be able to write it. But it's your idea. Write the first draft. What's the worst
That could happen.
that
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
happen?
Yeah.
Because just write it from the beginning to the end without judgment, without going back, without rethinking, self doubt. Just get from the beginning to the end and write. Tell yourself you want to write a bad draft. Write a bad draft. Give yourself the freedom to do that and do a loud reading of it.
Hmm.
Don't read it in your mind.
Oh, okay.
So,
Nice.
two things: write a bad first draft
Huh.
and gather a bunch of people
And
who
read
are
it
not
aloud.
just going to say, oh, you're lovely, you're amazing, I love you, who will actually have questions to ask you, who will criticize you, who also understand, whatever. And yeah, and do a loud reading. Nothing will tell you what's working, what's not working, like a loud reading of a play will. So,
Nice.
yeah.
Makes sense. Anything for you,
Yeah,
Sid?
I would stick with what she said in terms of like, don't be afraid to write shit. I mean, that's the number one rule of writing. I mean, it's if the first draft a lot of times needs to be rubbish, and but then you find that one thing, and even if the writing the big whole play is daunting, I think that was one thing that I liked from the writer's block sort of exercises. Write that one scene because sometimes it's just an idea, right? Or somebody's just like it's a conversation between. Write that scene, you know, of and like you said, get two people to read it or whoever how many characters are in it, just read it, and then you find your play in that. But if you don't put it down, it'll just be this thing that you said, oh, I had this idea for a play. Get it down in some form.
Right. So right, basically.
Yeah.
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 And the very last question, we spoke of work that we regret. What is your own favorite writing? Your favorite piece of work that you've written yourself?
Goodness.
Yeah. What's your favorite piece of playwriting of your own, with the least regrets, I suppose?
I think there's. Should I go first? There is one scene in Pala which I'm very
Impala.
proud
Okay.
of.
Okay.
I feel that I did something. The challenge with that scene was that it it couldn't have been a scene driven by action
Okay.
because it is about a Buddhist monk arguing with a guy who's the head of a Chinese security force,
Right.
and both of them arguing about the word liberation, because in Buddhism the central idea is liberation, and China is People's Liberation Army.
Yes.
But the meaning of liberation is
Completely
completely
different.
opposite.
Yes.
So how do you do that scene where the monk is not going to argue in the same way as the other guy, which is the way I'm trained, like in dialectics. He's not going to argue in dialectics, but he has to somehow bring forward his argument. It took 8 years to write that play, and I think 4 years was that scene.
Wow.
Because you meet monks and you talk to them and they say the one thing and then they say the other thing and then you have to understand it, and then but I think in the end it got somewhere where one could see the difference of the way they were arguing, even if one did not know the actual method.
Right.
It's by no means a masterful work. Anybody who's a Buddhist monk can look at it and say, oh, this is probably quite basic in their world. uh, but it was one of the hardest things to do, and it was enjoyable to try to solve that problem.
I think I remember that scene though. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
You can't say Chappa Katta or
I
you'll
don't
cough.
know. No,
So,
I've not heard Chappa Katta.
so
Uh, so in the most recent play I've written, it's a commercial Marathi play. It's called Zar Tarchi Goshta.
huh,
And there's a scene between the husband and wife about the loss of a child.
right.
And it's a pretty funny play otherwise.
Sounds hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So it is a really funny play. So I was actually, it was a challenge to see how, because sometimes audiences also get into a habit of laughing, and there's a certain rhythm that they notice, and then they laugh rhythmically. And so if you say lines with a certain kind of rhythm, they will laugh,
hmm,
and so I was worried that how do I kind of shift gears so abruptly and get them into this space which is very dark, and it needs to be extremely emotional, and they need to understand that they are both right and they are both wrong, and terrible mistakes have been made, and and they're really really going to hurt each other at the end of this. So that was a challenging scene to write, and I really enjoyed writing it, and um it really kind of affected the two actors when they first read it, and I really enjoyed watching that.
like a sadist. Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right. I think that's all we have time for. And thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
being
Thank
here
you.
and sharing all of this. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.